On my hand here is the 70-180mm F2.8 E-mount version of the Tamron lens, and it is a very impressive piece of glass if you ask me. I'm Richard and welcome to ZP Productions. I'm a portrait photographer, and on my hand here is the Tamron 70-180mm F2.8 Di3 VXD lens. And this lens, as you can see here, is really light and small. Even mounted on the A1, I can easily hold it in one hand without much strain. And this is probably the most impressive part of this lens, because even though it's a 70-180mm, it is not 70-200 by the way. The loss of 20mm may matter to some, but for the weight and size, I'm impressed personally. Now, before I start, I'd like to thank SLR Revolution and Tamron Singapore for loaning me this copy of the lens. Without them, I couldn't bring you this review here. Now, this lens here is only for mirrorless camera. It doesn't have any weird extension looking neck piece itself. So this lens is purely made for mirrorless cameras such as the Sony E-mount and the L-mount Alliance itself. Now, this lens, if you ask me, in terms of build quality, is pretty good. It's made of plastic and metal. You can touch some of the parts, and it has weather sealing. You can actually see the weather sealing rings on the mounting points. The thing is, this lens has no buttons and switches, so one of the least interaction you can do with the lens itself of its class. And notice so far when I zoom in, the lens do extend, and this is something that people may complain about because some people believe that zooming such a lens will result in a lot more dust in the lens itself. And personally, I have seen lenses, I don't think there is much of a difference between a zoom lens that extends and a zoom lens that doesn't extend. Now, there is only one switch on this lens, and that is a switch to just make sure that this thing don't get moved around when you are transporting it. But the lens itself has not much creep, as you can see here. When I put this lens upside down, it doesn't creep much, or creep at all. I don't even see it creeping. Yes, there's totally no creep at all. Now, this lens is really small in every way and very light in every way. It weighs only 900 grams with the hood, and even the filter trap in front is only a 67mm filter trap. So you can easily put filters such as NDs and stuff, or circular polarizers, and it doesn't cost much because it's such a small trap. Now, even the hood is also really small. This is a small petal hood. It is friction locked, as you can see. There is no button to unlock it. Now, I personally prefer button lock hoods because they are more lasting, and over time, friction will get loose, and I don't want my hood to just turn a little bit when I accidentally knock it and cause vignetting in my photos. So I prefer a button lock hood type. That's about it really. I have no much complaint of this lens from the physical aspect. In every single way, it is light, it is small, very compact. And the only thing that it extends and the hood is friction lock itself. Now, the next thing I'll talk about is operations in the field, and this lens have no buttons to press, so there's nothing to worry about. There's no switches to also toggle, so there's nothing to worry about. And this lens is really small, and you can see that it doesn't actually hit my fingers or anything. So using out in the field is very nice, very comfortable. And this lens, even when extended, doesn't feel like the center of gravity changed much. As such, I can hold this lens for a very good period of time without feeling too much wrist strain, which is very important because most 70-200 lenses are really heavy, and this 70-180mm lens by Tamron is really light and small and compact, and good weight distribution overall. The next thing I'll talk about this lens is that this lens has no image stabilization. All image stabilization has to be provided by the camera. So far I tried at 130, 120, it still gives me a good amount of keeper shots, and at 1.5 with 70mm, it does give me a keeper shot of 1/3 of the shots itself, which is still pretty much decent. Now, this lens has a very nice autofocus model. It is very quiet. Notice that you can't even hear the motor focusing. But yes, it has a very nice and quiet autofocus model. They call it voice call it extreme torque drive, but based on what I checked online, it looks like a linear motor. And this lens do focus really quickly in the field itself. I'm not a sports photographer. I don't have somebody running towards me to just check out the speed. But I can tell you that it never results in any weighting, be it in portraiture, be it the model spinning. It always catches on time and is always sharp. The only time it fails is when eye detection fails and detects the arm as the eye for some reason. But as long as the eye detection works properly, this lens never failed me in my portrait shoot itself. And that's about it for operations. Let's talk about optical quality. First, let's talk about the boring stuff. I shoot outside. I'll tell you that the lens at 70mm is sharp throughout the entire frame. Even at the extreme corner, it's still decently sharp. And for 180mm, it is sharp in most of the frame except the extreme corner, which is a little bit soft. Stopping it down a little bit does improve the sharpness itself. And then this lens, when you do night scenes with bright lights, you will notice firstly there is very little chromatic aberration. However, there are blooming in the lens, especially for bright lights. Now, of course, the contrast difference between the lights and the background is very huge, so that's something to note. In most situations, you will not face it, and I'll talk about it in some of my real-world shoots later. But the blooming will result in certain loss of contrast and certain loss of sharpness in the area itself. And then if you look at the left side, there is a little bit of coma for this lens, so the lights do look like some weird shapes, like fan shape itself. So this is something that you will probably not want if you are shooting astrophotography. At the corner and edges, it does produce weird looking lights. And now let's talk about real world performance. So I did a portrait in the beach itself. I can tell you that the camera with this lens combination is fantastic. It is always sharp as long as eye detection is working, and my model is quite tall, so it's always off center normally if I'm doing a full body portraiture. After I take the shot, I check it. If I zoom in, it's on the eye, it's always sharp. So very good performance if you ask me. And my model is moving around, sometimes she's spinning and stuff. I never miss a single shot with this lens itself as long as eye detection is working properly. I also noticed that this is a big shoot in the bright daylight, so there is normally tendency to get some chromatic aberration. I didn't notice a single chromatic aberration in the entire shoot itself, so I think the lens is actually performing very well. Now this lens, even though in the synthetic test just now with shooting outdoors, you see some blooming, in the beach shoot, even though the light is so bright, it has no bloom. So I think that the blooming is only for extreme situations. Now let's take a look at indoor studios itself. Now for the indoor studio shoot, I did 2 indoor studio shoot with this lens, and I think the 70-180mm range is fantastic for portraiture. 150mm, 180mm is actually quite good for close-up shots. So this is something that you should consider if you're doing studio photography and doing a lot of portraiture in the studio itself. At f5.6 is extremely sharp, be it in the center and off center, so I don't worry about it. The autofocus is still very good also, even in low light situation and focusing in the studio like this. So overall, I think the performance of this lens optically is very good. The blooming effect only appeared in my synthetic test. In my real world test, I didn't see it in any way. No chromatic aberration and sharpness throughout the entire frame is probably something that is worth talking about, and this is probably the keeper characteristic of this lens. Now overall, this lens, if you ask me, is a very nice lens, and if you need a lens of this range, 70-180mm, don't mind the loss of 20mm at the end, this lens is what I will recommend you, because the price of this lens is also very good. I mean, in Singapore it's 1.9k Sing dollars, and in the US you probably can get it slightly cheaper. If you go to SLR Revolution and ask them, you probably can get a short price too. Now other than that, for the size, the weight, the price, and its capability and its optical performance, I will recommend this lens to anybody who needs a lens of this range itself. Now, if you ask me personally, I'll probably not get it because I have never kept a lens that is almost 200mm for too long. I sold my RF 70-200, I sold my 200mm F2, I sold my GF 250mm. I have no affinity with any lens that is longer than 135. So, it's best that I don't purchase this lens because I will just sell it sooner or later. And that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this short little review of the Tamron 70-180mm F2.8 Di3 VXD lens. Overall, a nice performing lens, good price, good weight, good size. I really don't have much to complain. Even optically, it is still very good in terms of its performance. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. By the way, I'll talk about the Hasselblad 907X, so if you're interested in it, look out for it in the next video itself.